Welcome to SecurIT, where we discuss all things cybersecurity, people, trends, and products. Thank you all for joining us on our continuing journey. We try to keep up with all things cybersecurity and still do our day jobs in between. Imagine a person whose day job is to keep up with all things cybersecurity. This is why I'm so excited to introduce today's guest. From a BA in communications a few decades back to various jobs as staff writer to editor in prestigious publications like VentureBeat and CRN. He has covered mobile, he's done product reviews, focused on enterprise security, and recently evaluated Zero Trust and XDR. Today, we welcome Senior Editor Cybersecurity for CRN, Kyle Alspach. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much for joining us. Very excited to the conversation today, and we'll hit the ground running. So, the opening question, Kyle, usually on our podcast is all about you and your career and the various choices that you made to get here. A lot of people listening in are highly motivated and excited and inspired by our guests to follow in cybersecurity, and we know how much we need more people in this business. I alluded to a few of the things that you've done in our introduction, not to leave out a journey from Boston to Portland, Oregon as well. So tell us more about your background, your career, and how you're here today, please.
Great. No, thank you so much. I went to college for communications, like you had mentioned, and I kind of knew I always wanted to be a writer of some sort. Decided on journalism because that just seemed like that was where the most jobs were going to be available. And so this was back in 2005 when I graduated. So newspaper jobs were still, around. They weren't super plentiful, but they were around, and so that's where I started. Just started out working for a newspaper right near where I grew up in central Massachusetts, and worked at a couple newspapers, and then I feel like this was probably the best choice that I made as far as choices go. Was I decided to get into journalism for business journalism rather. And started covering, I guess initially it was like clean energy companies for the Boston Business Journal. And the reason that was a good decision is just that sort of introduced me to covering tech. And so ever since then, I've been, focused on the tech industry. And originally I was focused more on Boston, but now I'm at CRN, and I've been at a few other publications that are a little more nationally focused. And so, now I cover all different things, but I think that just, I'm very glad because tech has continued to be a thing that's been growing as far as journalism jobs go. And so it's just been able to, continue, being employed in that field, and being able to be a writer and a journalist is just something I've been really glad to have the opportunity to do.
And what an amazing journey, and a collection, a bibliography of articles that you've written over the years. We've been in touch for a few years now, and the conversations have evolved as we move forward. And you are in a unique position in as much as you've got this 30,000-foot view of cybersecurity as it's evolved. And I stand corrected; it wasn't 2 decades. It's almost 18 years. It's only 18 years since you started.
Oh,
So under 2 decades.
very
There's
close.
an there's a quick editorial correction, Kyle. So as I was saying, the 30,000-foot view of the landscape of cybersecurity. You pick up the phone, and CEOs of various cybersecurity companies want to talk to you. And you've also done deep dives. You've got this microscopic view of products in the XDR space. You've talked to Okta, you've talked to CrowdStrike, and you've broken down and analyzed solutions like zero trust architectures. So if you put all that for a brief moment together in the back of your mind as you look at all this and your recent visit to RSA and the conversations that you had there, what is top of mind for you?
I mean, I think that the biggest thing is just that a lot of the things you just mentioned are newer ideas, and I'm just fascinated to see where they go because I think especially with things like zero trust, this is like a totally unprecedented approach to cybersecurity. I mean, cybersecurity's been around for a while now, but there never was something that was like, okay, we're going to holistically look at basically everything that we do with security and try to build everything around this this principle that we think is important, which in this case is zero trust. I'm just very intrigued to see what actually happens if this lives up to its promise. I mean, that could be very powerful. XDR is another one where it's still a very new idea, but the promise of it seems pretty significant. And I mean, detection even without the extended part, but even if you just look at endpoint detection, I mean, we know that that's been making a difference. I mean, there's a number of reports last year that saw that ransomware did go down last year, and there was a bunch of reasons for it. But I mean, some people are pretty sure that part of it was that the detection tools, the endpoint detection tools, have just been getting better, and technology is making a difference. So so I'm interested to see. I mean, I gravitate toward the technology, I guess, sometimes with these things, and sort of start with that. There's certainly so many other factors, and there's human elements to all of this too. But I mean, I definitely am interested to see, like, if all of this technology that has been coming out. I mean, just interested to see if it. I mean, if it even fulfills a fraction of what people think it could. I mean, that could make a big difference in the future.
Absolutely. And speaking of future, and what a great segue. So, for you currently, Zero Trust XDR is top of mind, and it's amazing how this was echoed by CEOs of major cybersecurity companies as well, coming out of RSA. I'm going to break the future into a short term and long term, and let's take the short term. And by the way, Kyle, I'm in this unique position that I'm really excited. I get to ask questions of the guy who normally asks questions, so it's a really good feeling.
Yes.
Um, so you know, CISOs often listen to our conversations on this podcast, and we'll write back. And one of the biggest things in a CISO's job, or a CIO, or replace them with any set of acronyms that you wish: CIO, CTO. Um, they've got an organization to protect, uh, and you've got governance, regulation, and compliance coming down heavily. Add to that, the cybersecurity insurance piece industry that's now also going further and taking all this GRC requirements and are inadvertently becoming watchdogs for us, saying, "Hey, look, if you haven't adhered to all these GRC needs, we're not going to fulfill the policy, and without that, you're exposed on the ransomware side, right?" So it's an unintentional favorable consequence that cybersecurity insurance companies are playing that role. And what I'd like to do is look at the short term for these CISOs who have a tough job. They've got the board saying, "Look, are you fulfilling our cybersecurity needs?" And then they've got the organization to protect, right? There's the bookkeeper, who's, as I always say, my favorite line on this podcast is, it's Thanksgiving and they're looking for a cookie recipe, and they click on that link, right? So the CISO's got to protect this entire range, make sure they adhere to GRC, um, and protect the bookkeeper who will click on something he or she is not supposed to click on. For that group, in your mind, what should the focus be short term?
I mean, I think that I mean, yeah, I guess it's certainly hard. I mean, they have to meet those requirements, like you said, on cyber insurance, and so I mean, I guess that would seem to me like, I mean, depending on what industry they're in, that doesn't seem to be a negotiable thing. At this point, I mean, they certainly need to do these things. I mean, hopefully, a lot of them have already been doing some of this, though. At least, I mean, I think that that's sort of part of what's interesting to watch with it is just that with things like MFA, that I mean, as it turns out, a lot of organizations aren't actually using it, but just the fact that, I mean, nothing else could cause, I guess, some organizations to deploy it other than needing to meet their cyber insurance requirements. So, I mean, I would say, yeah, I mean, I would say that's a huge one. I mean, the regulatory aspect is interesting. I mean, it's almost like these are both kind of regulatory things at this point. I mean, one's from private industry, but I mean, I mean, just I mean, my understanding is, all the regulation requirements just continue to go up, and we certainly know about, when it comes to some of the reporting requirements and things like that, that more businesses are, being subjected to that, especially if they're, involved with critical infrastructure or whatnot. So that's not going to be, that's not going to be an optional thing either. So yeah, as far as prioritizing, I guess it would probably matter a lot what industry they're in, who their customers are, if they are serving the federal government, which many are, that would be, I mean, these would all be things they would have to factor in. Yeah, it's a tough job. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, that seems to be some, like, one of the most clear cut things you can say about cybersecurity is that being a CISO is not easy.
No doubt, an unenviable job, right? And it's like sitting on a carousel, spinning, 150 miles an hour. And I'm going to pick one thread, Kyle, and you started it, so let that be known. You use the words MFA, right? So let's talk about MFA briefly for a second as we try to unravel that spaghetti like conversation. Back in the day, again, this is before your time, it was Windows and little post it notes that said, this is your password. And they typed it in and went in. And then came the fact that Windows started imposing, and all other operating systems saying, change your password in 90 days. And everyone goes, oh, shucks, this is tedious. And then it was like, no, 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 your favorite dog, kid, or street or maiden name is not an acceptable password, and it's got to be a little more complex. And then it was, oh, now you have to have 10 character. I've read somewhere that 14 to 20 character passwords are not enough, and they've got to be more complex because they can be broken down with some serious computing power. Also, MFA in itself, is questionable, right? I mean, 90% of MFA can be hacked through man-in-the-middle attacks. There's MFA fatigue. I don't know about you, Kyle, but I've got authenticators coming out of purses that I didn't know I had, right? My bank has an authenticator, someone else has another authenticator, and we've got like 6 to a dozen authenticators on our phones, just trying to get access. I don't know if you've tried trying to log into somewhere on an airplane where you have one Wi-Fi connection, and your authenticator is on your cell phone when you're logged in on your laptop, and you log in and log out, and it's complex and tedious. And so the second part of my question now is about this exciting and glamorous future for us, right? Microsoft has come out and said, hey, we want a passwordless world. And normally it's Microsoft sneezes and we all catch a cold. And the giants in the industry are taking this whole concept of passwordless seriously, right? Millennials are saying, why do we need? We're too distracted to remember passwords, verify who we are. The company that I'm part of has continuous behavioral authentication and says, look, we can figure out who you are by the speed, rhythm, and cadence of your keyboard. And we work well with products like Okta and others to authenticate. That's one of the trends, and albeit a low-hanging fruit that we will solve for in the next couple of years. Um, if I had a penny for every time someone talked about AI being an issue, right, I'd be able to retire. I mean, the recent Writers Guild strike, also one of the demands are, look, control AI. So there's all these AI conversations happening. There's zero trust. How do we wrap our arms around zero trust? So my question for you as we evolve, and you've alluded to this in your previous answer already, and if you've forgotten, I do want to remind you about your unique space here, right? You are awesome. You specialize in taking a deeper look into important trends. So, what's exciting about the future of cybersecurity beyond, let's say, the short term?
Well, I mean, yeah, I would love to say a little on AI, if that's not an over
Please.
discussed topic. Yeah, I mean, I actually just wrote something today on it, so it's certainly fresh on my mind. But I think that just the bringing of generative AI to security. There's a lot of hype about it. Obviously, like there is in every space that generative AI is coming to, but it does seem like there is some meaningful stuff that this is going to do for cybersecurity in the future. And some of it is I think not figured out or like even dreamt up yet, but just that the technology does seem to have applicability because it is all about data sets and training the model based on the data that's out there. I mean, security has tons of data, and has tons of data that it needs and that its professionals need to sift through and find things inside of. And so just from my conversations with people last week at RSA and in general, like it just seems like that is I mean, I would be very surprised if we don't continue hearing more about generative AI and security, for a long, long time, because it does seem to have a lot of applicability there. And I think it will go back to the data really. I spoke with some folks last week that are talking about well, each of these vendors is coming out with certain tools that are based on their data sets, but for others out there who can kind of combine all of those things with each other, combine the different data sets, combine the different large language models that are out there with each other, and cut across the Microsofts and the Googles and folks like that, that you could really have a pretty powerful outcome from doing all those things and using all of this data. And this is a very new thing. I mean, it's not we all know generative AI is still brand new in the scheme of things. And and I think it's gonna be, I mean, it's gonna be very interesting, I think, to see what people come up with. I mean, one conversation I had that really kind of stuck in my mind is that there's this whole question in security about finding the unknown unknowns, and that is that's kind of like always this evasive thing that kind of keeps people up at night, not being able to figure out what these what these things are, what these assets are that we don't know about, and things like that. And just that's something where generative AI and sort of the ability to use natural language to query systems, it just could make it a lot easier, and maybe make it more possible to actually find what some of these unknown unknowns are, which would be potentially huge for cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And ultimately, it is the highest and best use of our time, right? We can definitely free ourselves up to do something better. Yet there's a reptilian brain saying, "Look, am I going to lose my job?" Maybe in the short term, but in the longer term, mankind's going to be better for technology like this. So definitely a check mark in the I am for in favor of AI column for you, Kyle.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, it all depends on, where you're applying it. But I mean, it does seem like in cybersecurity, it's a little less controversial, maybe, like,
For
um,
sure,
for various reasons. But
right?
I think that I mean, cybersecurity needs to help. Cybersecurity
Yep.
needs automation, and there's not enough people, and there's too much data, and it just kind of seems like very timely. These are all the issues that everyone's always talking about with the problems with security, and here's something that, hey, it's worth trying and seeing if it might help.
And intriguing that all the AI issues we see are more entertainment industry related at the moment, right? The impersonations and the songs and everything else. But it's interesting how this will unfold. And before we bookend this conversation and come back to you, I've always said, and I don't claim authorship or the fact that I invented this, but I've always believed that at the intersection of big data, or as you refer to this as the combination of big data, artificial intelligence, and human intelligence, is where the magic will happen, right? This is where the evolution in not only our industry and IT as a whole, but in cybersecurity and everything else will happen. Your comments?
Yeah, no, I think that's, I mean, from my understanding, that's totally on the mark, because you really do need all those things. I mean, the point's been made that some tools are coming out that are based on generative AI, but maybe they don't have the data. to actually make it matter and actually be useful. But at the same time, it's not. I don't think anyone thinks it is going to be a totally AI solved problem. And other people that I was just speaking with last week were making that exact point. Some of these problems are so complex, especially in cybersecurity. Some of these problems are so big that you absolutely need human intelligence there. And there's I don't think anyone's talking about not having there be cybersecurity professionals anymore. I think it's just a matter of making them actually able to solve the problem, whereas right now the problem's not solved.
True. To close out this conversation about the future, um, I was reading all your writings on, and thank you for all the great work you do. In fact, talking to 15 CEOs at RSA and figuring out trends. Now, this is not a comparison. So, in the couple of dozen conversations that we've had here, on this podcast, we come up with a similar trend, right? The Everyone's talking about going back to the basics, simplifying. Your conversation with these CEOs of great repute were, hey, look, we need to integrate. Or we need to consolidate. Some actually use the word simplify. And in a world where we're now running out of 3-letter acronyms and we're moving now to 4-letter acronyms like CMMC and all of this stuff, Kyle, talk about the need, to get our arms around cybersecurity and actually go back to the basics and simplify. Is that something that you're seeing in your conversations?
It's certainly being talked about a lot. I'm very curious if I don't know that I could 100% say that it's happening, but I think that everyone's kind of at the stage of acknowledging that this is the problem, and this is the right issue, or the right thing to focus on. But I mean, it does seem like even some of the more consolidated platforms still are pretty complex to use in practice. But I mean, it at least seems like things are going in the right direction if people are acknowledging that this is a big part of why security is so difficult, is the complexity. And there are just so many tools out there that don't work well with each other, and that's an issue. And I think that if the developers of these tools are at least acknowledging that, or feeling pressure to integrate with each other, that's a positive thing, and could help to simplify things in the future. And not just, but I mean, I think exactly what you're saying. I mean, it seems like up until this point, everyone's just kind of been left to their own devices to try to figure out how to make these things work with each other, and not user friendly, not good for security, because if the tools can't talk to each other, then how are you ever supposed to correlate things? You can't just look at all
Absolutely.
these things and correlate them. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, true, true. The more data we have, it's going to be humanly impossible to spot trends, and maybe use automation and AI and RPA and machine learning to do the heavy lift, such that we can take critical decisions in real time and keep it simple. Yes, thank you. That was deep thoughts and greatly appreciated. And now to the fun softball question that we usually end with, Kyle. So, you, right, the man behind the persona, tell us a little bit about, this is about relationships. What are your core values? What are the human beings in your life that have influenced you, your family, your mantra, and if I may repeat, your core values, please.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely think my family's been very important. My dad was a Protestant minister, actually, and so certainly that had an impact on me. I think it's made me always at least have a part of me that's like, I need to get along with people. Like I need I mean, I'm obviously not gonna get along with everyone in life, but that you should start from a place of trying to be nice and get along with people if it's possible. So I mean, I definitely think I have I that's been a huge focus for me in my life, and try to be come off as or at least be a nice person as much as I can be, which in journalism isn't always the easiest thing to do. Sometimes you're trying to get people to do things they don't want to do, or talk to you when they don't want to talk to you. And so I think certainly being trying to be less intimidating in some of those situations, which I think is kind of my nature, can be helpful. And yeah, I try to always remember, that I am talking to people when I'm interviewing them, and even if they're a CEO of a big company or something like that, that they're also a person.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and yeah, I mean, I guess just as far as other values, I mean, I certainly, I mean, I try, again, sort of goes to being a journalist, but I try to be fair, and that's in my work and just in general. I think that's, something that's pretty key to me that, surprisingly, not everybody does that. So I
Yeah,
feel like
this is
that's
true.
worth pointing it out, actually, even though, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but especially as a journalist, yeah, I mean, I think that that's the thing that I can always promise people if I'm gonna do a story on somebody. It's like, I mean, I can't promise you exactly what, how you're gonna feel about this story, but I'm gonna do my best to be fair, and I can promise that that will be the case. So yeah, that's a huge thing, and just I don't know, curiosity, I guess, is just another big value for me. Like, that's sort of what makes me want to be a journalist. And I've covered, different things, and cybersecurity is definitely one where, it's sort of like an endless amount of stuff to learn. And so I think, just being very curious about it, I think is really key to me and why I like doing it.
And it shows, as we've followed you, or as I have followed you over the years. You're an influencer, and your passion shows. And this is why, although it took a few tries, I am very excited that we actually got you on to
Yeah.
talk to you. That's invaluable. So thank you very much, Carl, for the conversation.
Yeah.
Uh, am I okay to say that our listeners can actually find you on LinkedIn should they need to reach out or have any questions or comments?
Yes, definitely.
Yes,
Please.
good, good. And just typing your name in will appear all over the internet, including on CRN, and we will put a link as well when we publish this podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Secure IT as I continue the cybersecurity discussion with customers, vendors, end users, and employees, helping us learn from their insights and knowledge and from their experiences. Make sure to follow this podcast for free on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and wherever podcasts are hosted. And please do direct message me on LinkedIn or Twitter with feedback, questions, comments. Oh, we'll take kudos even. Thanks again, and see you next month, everyone.